Hello and welcome to Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and joining me on the show today is Supervisor Cliff Edson, who represents District 1 and is the board chair. Cliff, welcome.
Hi, thank you, Joel. How are you?
I'm doing great. Happy
Good.
New Year to you.
You too.
I'm looking forward to a good 2016. Are you as well?
I am praying for that one.
Alrighty,
Yes.
alrighty. Well, there's no more important topic that I can think of than the Butte Fire. And you were serving as board chair all the way through and on the board in general, which was really the main body that made decisions about how the county handled that. And I was hoping you could take our viewers through your experience with that fire and walk us through how it went and then where we are now.
Sure, I'll give it my best.
Okay.
I remember on Wednesday night, I think it was September 8th, I seen a little plume of white smoke and over towards McCollum Hill. I called the sheriff, Captain Macedo answered the phone. I said, hey, we got a fire over there, but you know, CAL FIRE usually jumps right on it. But I just thought I'd let you know about it. That night, it went ballistic, apparently. Jumped the river and got into that fuels undergrowth and the underbrush that it's so dry out there. It was hot that night. Plus, we have so many fuels on the ground. It was volatile. And so I got called in the next day at 3 o'clock to the first, what they call a MAC meeting. It's a meeting of the OES, the sheriff is OES, and it's a meeting of the different groups within the county and special districts to discuss the fire. Well, just before that, I was called. We did an emergency meeting with the Board of Supervisors to call for a local state of emergency so that we can get assistance from the governor. So that was at 1 o'clock. 3 o'clock, we're at the meeting. I noticed that things seemed to be moving kind of slow for me, anyhow. And so I started making calls to CAL FIRE and our state representatives to see if we can help speed things up for what was going on with the fire. The sheriff was doing everything they could, evacuating people. People were filing out of the Mountain Ranch Road and all the other places into Jackson, out through McCollum Hill, and all coming everywhere. Hogan, Hogan and Comanche, the Burson Church, the Cowboy Church down there, the Glory Bound, and Good Sam, and in San Andreas. So we had people everywhere, hundreds of people just fleeing from their homes. And so it kind of made me very excitable and pushy, actually. And so I was pushing hard as I could to get the resources here to take care of this thing.
And you knew it was bad with that emergency meeting that Thursday morning at 3 o'clock? You were told this is a pretty serious deal?
At 3 o'clock in the afternoon, I was looking for cooperation between the sheriff and CAL FIRE. Okay. And what I was seeing was that the CAL FIRE had it started in Tuolumne County, or in Amador. So they had their base camp set over at the Amador Fairgrounds. And I seen it moving south into our county, and so I started immediately asking them, or actually more directing them, to move it here in our county to the Angels Camp Fairgrounds, because that's the biggest place, or the place that they could go. And so that was a monumental task. Actually, it's a very large operation of about 4,500 people and everything else going along with it. They resist a little bit because I think that they know it's hard to move that many. That's like moving a city. They started moving 1.5 days later. During that time, Chief Robitel came over to the Office of Emergency Services, and I asked him to take me to the fire. And we went every road to the fire. So we went to McCollum Hill, up Jesus Maria. We went up Harbor Road, Leonard Road, everywhere. I wanted to know where it was. because we were getting a 2-hour old information from CAL FIRE for evacuations, which was putting our sheriffs, in a position where it was kind of tough for them. They didn't know where the fire was exactly. And it's hard to do anyhow because the fire is moving so quickly.
Yeah.
So the fire was moving actually between, and sometimes it was 60 feet per minute, and sometimes it would jump 500 feet in a couple of seconds. So it was a monster. It was a monster. And I believe that every firefighter, every sheriff, every deputy sheriff, all of the agencies that came up here to help assist, they did everything they could to assist us. And we are really fortunate that we have only lost a couple of people in this incident. So as time went on, the fire came closer and closer to San Andreas. And they called for an evacuation of San Andreas. I was standing there when they did that, and I actually became the 800-pound gorilla in the room, and made them rethink that one. So they did, and I think the evacuation lasted 45 minutes.
So they called for the evacuation, and then they called it off within 45 minutes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And the reason is because, thank God for Chief Young. Chief Young was had boots on the ground here in San Andreas, and he was out in the hallway, I guess listening to my rant. And I went out to him and I asked him directly, I says, do we need to evacuate San Andreas? He said, absolutely not.
Okay.
And then I started putting a pressure on CAL FIRE and the sheriff. And they're more into absolutely safe,
Right.
And they have to be. But Chief Young knows the area and knows what's going on here and how things react. He's been around here a long time.
Yeah.
So I'm glad he was there.
How was it that San Andreas was saved? I mean, it seemed like the fire was just barreling toward town there for a while, and then all of a sudden it stopped.
Well, there's a couple of things that happened. I am very lucky that Chief White was here with us through CAL FIRE. I also had his boss, the Southern Regional Chief, on the line. I had support from Barbara Boxer's office, from Diane Feinstein's office, and Bigelow, from Frank Bigelow's office, and from Tom Berryhill's office. They were all in contact with me all day long.
Nice.
And they were providing, I guess, the pressure on the other end for support, because right about that time the Valley Fire started up. So CAL FIRE, with limited resources, has to do what they have to do.
Yeah.
And whoever makes the most noise, I believe, wins. In this case, I think they did a pretty good job of dividing up their resources to make sure that San Andreas and the rest of our county, as much as we could save it, got saved.
Okay. Well, I mean, was this just a fire that there really isn't anything that you can do when it gets going like that? Or were there any other strategies that could have been employed early to try to nip this in the bud? Or when in retrospect, what are your thoughts on that?
There's a lot of thought out there about a lot of different things. I am not an expert in fire.
Okay.
So I don't know. I can't answer that one. I can only say that they were doing everything, what I seen, they were doing everything they could to respond to what we had going. And once we got engaged, all together, working together, it was very good. They worked hard. And I have to give Chief White again praise. Our sheriff's department, fantastic. I mean, those folks saved a lot of lives, a lot of lives. In particular, Rochelle Whiting and her husband, and they lost their home as well.
Oh my gosh.
But they were out evacuating people while their home was burning up, and so and there were many other deputy sheriffs out there doing the same thing. So we hear a lot about firefighters, and we see all these signs, thank you, the CAL FIRE and firefighters and stuff like that, and we thank them. But there are many people that made this thing as good as it possibly could come out. It's the sheriffs, the The county itself did a phenomenal job in my opinion, because we're skeleton crew, really. We had the volunteers. Stacy Johnston from the Chamber of Commerce was also like a center for supplies down at the Burson Church. Sherry Roosh was at the Cowboy Church or Glory Bound. Same thing. They were working together, and there are many people that were just took time in their lives to help other people, and I went and visited all of them, and it was pretty enlightening.
What was the impact it had on you to see the community come together like that?
You know, to see it made me feel very good about living here. I got to tell you, I just think we have the best people that could possibly be in this county. Everybody wanted to contribute, and almost everybody did. I didn't see anybody lagging. Everybody cooperated. It was the first time that I ever seen so many people just automatically work together. And you have those folks out there that can lead, and those folks out there that just love working. And the folks like Stacy and Sherry were leaders, and you could see that. Our team, Steve Kearney was very good at putting out real-time information. So he would sit there, because there's, I'm in there raging, and then you have Mike Oliveira in there kind of prodding me to rage. We worked real well together. Steve was in there putting out real-time information because we didn't have a PIO. And so, Public Information Officer. So Steve filled that gap until we could work that out. He did a fantastic job of letting everybody know what was going on, and you need to know. Your public needs to know what's going on.
Right. What was the hardest moment for you during the fire?
There's a lot of hard moments, actually. Yeah. One of the hardest moments for me was the first day when I had to call my mom and tell her to leave her house, and I couldn't leave to go get her. So that was a very difficult thing for me to do. And she argued with me, naturally. Right. And so, and she lives up on Old Gulch Road, which is, that fire was nuts back there. And so it was getting close, and I told her to leave, and she was saying, no, I'm not going to leave. And I had to, get a little bit rough with her on the phone. Yeah. And finally she did. She left. That was a very hard thing. Because I didn't know how she was until my wife called me and said, yes, she's at the restaurant.
Oh, thank God.
The other thing is watching all of my friends and the people that I know, my clients from the restaurant, my customers, running out of away from their homes, and then waiting for days, just because everybody, including myself, thought, okay, well, it's fire, it's going to be over, and we're going to go back home. Well, I knew that a lot of them didn't have a home and left, and that was very hard for me. So I would sometimes have to tell them. Oh, yeah. So it was, but you have to, and then they could process it. And by the time they get home or get to go back, they know what's there, and they have it processed. I think it was the right thing to do. But I would say that seeing the hundreds of people come up to me, because not only because I'm the board chair, supervisor, but because I also own Country Cliffs, and I see them there. They came up to me, hugging me and telling me that they lost everything. It's a tough thing for me to process, and I had a couple nightmares for a few nights, but you get strong, and you go back, and you try to solve problems and find solutions for things.
So the fire was just moving crazy fast, and it seemed like it might even get past Sheep Ranch and maybe go into the Highway 4 area and maybe even into the Stanislaus River Canyon, maybe even in Tuolumne County. What was it that allowed the fire to be stopped where it was? How did they do that?
Well, we were able to get some good air support in. The DC-10s came in. They brought in quite a bit of air support. They had a tremendous amount of ground crews out there. And then SPI did a fantastic job up there, up near, or before Arnold, making some good fire trails, fire breaks, and along with CAL FIRE. So once they were able to turn the fire, they actually, we had a stroke of luck. The north wind came in, and that brought it away from San Andreas and up into an area where they could actually turn it into each other. And so along with all of the coordination between all of the different agencies and groups, they were able to get it under control. When it was, and it was in a second burn, it ended up in the Old Gulch fire area. So once it got out of that real hot, unmanaged area where all the underbrush and everything was, it could calm down a little bit.
Okay.
But it was throwing some pretty good chunks of fireballs out, for quite a while.
Oh yeah. So it's out. It's been out for some months now. But we're left with, is it 70,000 plus acres that were burned?
Yeah, it's about 72,000.
72,000. More than 400 homes were destroyed, and with it, so many lives. So what's happening now? And what's your involvement, the county's involvement on the recovery effort at this point?
So as soon as the fire looked like it was going to get under control, we started putting together what they call a CLAC. The CLAC was a place, it's Calaveras Local Assistance Center. We had a bunch of people sitting around wondering what's next. That's a tough thing to go through when you don't know what's happening to everything you owned, ever. And so we were lucky enough to bring in, to have like the Good Samaritan Church come in, and some of these, the Mennonites, and then Southern Baptists, a few of these other groups come in that are disaster relief experts. And they came in to help people once they started going back to their properties, to sift through their belongings, or what's left, and find things that could give them a little bit of closure in many cases. And I heard some just wonderful stories about that too. But once you start processing people, we were still waiting for them to start opening areas up. And they couldn't do that because it was so hot up there, and they were assessing the damages. Once the heat calmed down and the damages were being assessed, then we could start letting people in. The one thing that I didn't talk about here was the animal evacuation effort that went along with this whole thing during the process. It was wild. We didn't know that we were living in an ark. I mean, I think there's as many animals as there are people up in that area, and people just care about their animals. They love them. And so we had a group of evacuators that helped with that as well. Yeah, that worked out. It had a little rocky points to it, but it worked out pretty well at the end.
Cool.
So we were able to save a lot of animals too.
What was the assistance from the state and federal government like?
OES came in probably about the third day,
Okay.
and they were great. The OES director himself, Mark Gilladucci, is a fantastic person. He worked hard for our county, and his crew that was here were very helpful in assisting us. FEMA came in a little later on, and they were pretty much like OES, and started getting to work on trying to figure out how we're going to get some short-term housing and things for people, and looking at that sort of thing. So it all has a process.
And there's some good news about some FEMA housing that's coming in right now. What's the latest on that?
Yeah, we actually have two right off of Mountain Ranch Road. If you haven't noticed, it's at that little trailer park there, just as right behind the Health and Human Services building. There's a little trailer park there. There's two of them sitting there. And off of Lewis Street in San Andreas, there's 11 units that are being put in right now, with a total of 28 that's supposed to be there. And then 27 more off of Gold Strike at, I forget the name of the subdivision. It's not quite complete yet, but it's got all the hookups and everything, which makes it really great. The problem that we had is during a drought, the state put CPUD on curtailment. So they could not have any more hookups, even through this, right? So we have all of these people that need the housing. FEMA went to the state and asked for asked them to allow us to have 55 hookups. And during that whole process, I discovered from CPUD that they actually have been through all of the hoops to prove that they are really not in need of this curtailment. So our board, I've asked our CAO to get together with Donald Leatherman, who is the director for CPUD, and get a support resolution to give to our legislators to be able to try to get CPUD off of that curtailment. Because some people may not want to rebuild up in the fire area, but they still want to stay here in Calaveras County, and we want to be able to hook them up if we can.
Do you think people still have hope to rebuild and stay, or do you think people are leaving?
I think a lot of it depends on how old they are and what their resources are. Some people I've talked to are in their 70s. They have resources, but they don't want to go through the rebuild process again, so they won't. Some people know that they're going to be able to go back up there in a year's time or a year and a half, a couple of years. It's going to be green again. It's going to be beautiful. We get this cleanup going, and it's going to be a very beautiful area. It's just destined to be that.
Yeah.
We are working hard to get the lots cleaned up, the site cleanup going. Jason Boetzer, who is our environmental health director at the county, has been on this thing from day one. Is a hardworking man, and set up this whole deal with the cleanups crews. We have over 600 people working on that right now, and right around 230 trucks running every single day that they can, because due to weather and things like that, with the goal of getting this done as quickly as possible. It's not moving as fast as any of us would like it to, but in order for us to have a clean environment in that area, because there's a lot of toxins, and if you look around this room even, or even what you're wearing, there's a lot of toxins. We don't know what the long-term effects of that are, or the short-term effects on people's lungs and things like that. So the idea is to clean it up and test it. Once it's tested, they get a certificate that says, hey, your property's clean. That's resale value right there. And once it's clean, they can start rebuilding on it. It's the safest way to go. And we don't want it in our water table, and all of that. So Jason's been all over it. I applaud him. He's done a fantastic job. And his team, his crews, his whole department, actually. Our public works director, Jeff Grovitz, has been working tirelessly from day one. He recognized the debris flows and the mudslides and all of that, and clearing out the waterways to make sure that we don't have flooding, because after the burn, there's nothing left to hold the water back, and it's going to run. Well, if it runs real hard, it'll take it all the way into Part E and those areas, and you know what happens, the water gets screwed up. So
Yeah.
I mean, it's just a constant, everything, we have to pay attention to everything. As far as people goes, we still have people out there. There's a lot of groups out there helping right now. We appreciate that very much. There's a long-term recovery group that is chaired by Alan Sanders, and their goal is to get it rebuilt up there. So get people back in their homes, people that couldn't qualify for some funding. They're going to try to help with that. But their goal is to build their community back up again.
Got it.
Yeah.
Because we only have a couple minutes left, can I just do some rapid fire so we can get a couple more
Yeah.
things? There was a recent decision for you to continue as board chair, and there was some controversy around that. Can you just speak to that for the public?
Well, we're in the middle of a crisis,
Okay.
and I've been on the front line of this crisis from day one. Mike Oliveira or Supervisor Oliveira and Supervisor Kearney pretty much was there with me the whole time. They recognize that, I think, and they feel that it's not really a good idea to change leadership in the middle of a crisis. So, the goal here is to take care of Calaveras County. So, yeah, it caused controversy.
But you want to see this through? Is that really what
I
it comes
think
down
that
to?
I think it's better for the county, really.
Okay.
It's a tough thing, right?
Yeah.
Because I like Chris. I think he's a good supervisor and a great person. But he wasn't engaged as much as I was through this, and largely because he's kind of stuck in his area, and I have both areas.
Got it.
And so I'm on the receiving end and the giving end as well.
Got it. And I wish we had more time for this, but you've been really pushing the watershed management,
Yes.
and the Butte Fire really is an example of what happens when you don't manage watersheds.
Yes.
So we don't have time to talk about it, but if people want to find info, would they just call you or go to a website, or what would be a good way to find out more about
They can
that?
call me. There's going to be an RCD on the ballot in June. It's called a Resource Conservation District. That is the beginning of our county's ability to manage our watershed. The watershed management is probably one of the biggest and best things that we can do, and you could probably talk about that on another show because you know all about it. If we are able to do that, we will have a less wildfire danger, we will have a safer place to live, and we will have a greater supply of water. Not to mention that it's going to create a whole bunch of jobs. So that's where we need to go, but it needs to happen through a central point in the county. So that we can make it work for the county.
And that's going to be on the ballot this June to start that formation process?
Yes.
Okay. All right. Well, Cliff, I know that this has been a tough last year, and it's been emotionally trying, but thank you for doing everything you can, to help us get through this.
Yeah, you're
And
welcome.
I hope 2016 is a much better year than the way 2015
I have a
ended.
feeling it will be. We have a lot to be thankful for, and I want to thank everybody in our county for reacting the way they did, coming to the aid of people, and also our county employees. Many of them lost their places too, but they're still working. So,
Thank you.
all right, thanks.
And thank you for joining me on this edition of Inside View. I'm your host, Joel Metzger, and I hope you join me next time.